Yeah, we've touched new ground. We've been doing pavement management for some time now, but it's never been like this. So you can see from the slide earlier, I was talking about how we had the most paved roads in Florida of any other county back in the 1920s, and still today we're among the top of counties in the state of Florida. We have the 4th largest county in the state, and we have the largest county north of the Everglades. The 3 that are bigger than us have a lot of the Everglades in their county. So that being said, our challenges we pressed upon earlier in the introduction, but I just wanted to point to the Rhode Island sitting where Tampa Bay should be compared to the size of Polk County. That's actual size. So you can see that Polk County is quite a large county. This is another interesting slide. There's 4 states that have less miles of centerline miles of road than Polk County. And I also want to stress that over half of our roads are local roads, local or urbanized sections. So we have a lot of other infrastructure that we're tracking that we have to manage in addition to our pavements. So I have a relatively small staff, so we'll touch on that in just a second though. How we got here. We started in 2004 tracking all of our assets. But as part of that, we did pavement conditions using the PACER rating system. We tracked that data in the N4. At the time, it was Hansen software. We keep that data still in our Hansen software, but we were doing pavement management pretty much as a worst first. We started doing some different talks and trying to make decisions on where to go from there. And then in 2015, we began to change the process. We started doing treatments based on distresses that are on the pavement, and instead of just saying, let's go resurface everything with 1.5 inches or 2 inches of asphalt. So in 2017, we hired the Kercher group, and they came in and helped us. And the first thing we said is we want to cover all of our business processes. We want to make sure that this works with our overall asset management process, with other divisions, because a lot of other divisions have input into what we do or an effect on what we do. We hope that in this summer of 2018, we'll begin to realize and use all of the features that are available. We've already got some preliminary results. We had a soft go live. We're inputting all of our condition data and finishing up all of our condition inspections now. We're doing all of our inspections in-house with windshield surveys. So it's been a long process. These are the three major groups. This is our overall organizational structure. But the 3 groups in the red box are the ones that have the most effect on our system. The public safety group, they have 911 addressing. They have authority over all of our road name changes, so our road inventory changes monthly possibly. There's constant changes to it. Our land development group, they handle all of the new subdivisions, all the new infrastructure that's coming in through the land development process. So we get a lot of stuff from them. They just started a new project for new software. But the main one that has an effect on it is our own division, the infrastructure group, and the roads and drainage division in particular. In the roads and drainage division, from right to left is the administration group. They handle a lot of the MMS data entry for us, whether it be financials or the work management for the other divisions, and they support our whole division. The roadway management group, they handle all of the maintenance on a roadway infrastructure, the pipes, sidewalks, everything that's out there. We got 23 different assets we track. The traffic group, they do signs, signals, and striping on the roads. And then we have the management group. and they manage all of the projects. So that is where our pavement management engineer is. She's Katia Delgado, and she's the one that kind of started the ball rolling in 2017. Then under the survey and mapping section is where we're housed, the asset management group. I have 7 people that work for me. 5 of them are field GIS technicians that they're all have a background in either construction or maintenance, and then we've brought them along to be GIS techs. I have 2 in the office GIS technicians that work under me, and we manage and maintain all of the data. The office staff are responsible for the data accuracy, data completeness, data uniformity, database schema, database management, QAQC process of all the data, et cetera, et cetera. The field staff, they're responsible for checking in and out their data, going out in the field, and then making sure that they complete the area of work that they were in. Asset management, what's the solution? We've had Infor public sector for now 13 years, or working with it for 13 years. We've owned it longer, but our land development group just went to Acela, and our IT division is trying to push us towards using that software. And we just did this pavement management with AgileAssets. I really like what AgileAssets does for the pavement management so far, what we've seen. So that could be an option. So we just had to get the right people going the right way. Data collection. The transition from the PACER, which was a 1 to 10 scale, to tracking individual distresses on the road it was a big transition. So we had a lot of training to do, even though we were looking at all the distresses, to actually track the severity and extent of every distress that's out there, or the 10 we're tracking. It was a little bit of a challenge, especially with sometimes the staff you wind up having, or their level of expertise with software and those kind of things. So, but we took on the challenge of managing all this data, and have from day one pretty much as a GIS-centric data model. All of our data is housed in GIS in a geodatabase that we manage. We have full control over the schema and all that, so we set up domains for almost every field. From the get-go, we didn't do that, and we found out we had a lot of garbage data that we had to clean up. So when you get started, make sure that's one of the things you look at. You need to set up a good schema so that there's no abbreviations for 10 different abbreviations for one thing. People are in random. It's not a good idea. The GIS, it talks to, and data passes back and forth from GIS to IPS-8. We also have created viewers through shape files and different things that can be shared back and forth with the IPS software. We have views that we created that we can use with the AgileAssets and the Acela product. So right now, though, our main focus is pavement management, so we use GIS back and forth for our pavement management process. So that process this is a long slide with a lot of stuff on it, so I'll try to just rush through it point by point, or go through it point by point, not rush. We set up a detail map. That's one of the first things we do. We set up an MXD on our map, on our exporting computer, that has only the fields the guys need to see in the field visible. So we turn off all the columns that they don't need to see, because that's just pages they have to go through. So we turn off everything that they don't need. We've set up the exports to only have the files they need, and they export just the area they're going to work in. That way there's no overlap All of our guys are assigned specific areas, so we have no problem with having conflicts when we check the data back in, etc. Then we load them on, right now we're using Trimble Yuma tablets. And these tablets were handy because they're able to handle large data sets or doing a lot of different visual things with the data, so we can make maps look good and actually know what you're looking at. We took, and I was just talking to a couple of people earlier before the presentation started, something that seems so simple as to putting a TV monitor on a laptop stand in the truck and connecting it to the tablet with an HDMI cable, giving them a wireless mouse and a wireless keyboard, because the data entry process is so hard to pick on that tiny little screen and see where you're at. So that it's just helped them tremendously to be more efficient and quicker to get things done and be more accurate. Setting up the GIS preferences in the or the GPS preferences in the data collector so that it automatically pans to the location where they're at. So when they drive down that segment and do that inspection, they pull over on the side of the road, they're sitting right beside the segment they need to select on the map. That opens up, they pull off the side of the road, they open that up, they enter what they saw, and then they typically that goes back to the database domains I said we set up. So they have the database domains that have the level of the level of the severity and the extent of the severity. So when they just pull it, it's just a drop-down menu for each one of the fields they have to populate. Those domains are set up in the SDE. And then the last field and most important field is, oops, wrong button. The last field and most important field is the last inspection date. This field, instead of having an inspected yes/no checkbox to see if we covered it, the last inspection date is the date that they fill in that they inspected that asset. So when they come in and they download, they go in and they select everything that has a last inspection date, and the selection shows up on the screen and they can see if they've missed any segments. So all the segments that are selected, if there's any missing in there, then they know they have to go back out and they'll be working in that same area. And then the cycle kind of just starts all over again. After that, or during that time, and prior to that time, I have to do the QAQC. My job is to go out and physically measure in all of the distresses I find on sample sections that they're going to look at. And then I have to do 30 segments over our network that are basically 1/10 of a mile long. And then we compare that with, so before the process starts, we go out and do that, and then they see if they're getting the same thing we're getting, kind of just QAQC. But then during the process of doing the locations, I also go out and re-inspect areas that they've done, so we just can maintain a level of quality that we can depend on. And with that slide, I will hand it over to Aaron. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Harold. Okay, so I just want to talk a little bit about the project that we delivered for the county and how we sort of got to this point. We had a series of tasks over 2 phases. I guess the first thing to note here is when we initially answered the call for this project, the county had asked for a pretty simple pavement management system. There was very little detail in their RFP, or RFQ for that matter. And we answered it maybe a little bit of a Hail Mary, but we answered it like maybe you ought to go a little bit deeper and look and see what you all are doing. With an agency that size, county agency that size, it's just kind of revisit. And it was during the interview process when we were up there that I think that we really made the real push to evaluate not only their business processes and all the things that would ultimately go in here, but try to fit in place what is the right software solution to what you're trying to accomplish. And it was the first time they'd really maybe all had a chance to think through that. And so that really led to this full task deliverable that you see here. And so that first task really was a full business review. Task 2 was getting their pavement data collection process in place, moving from the PACER rating methodology to getting the detail needed that we believe is necessary to drive robust pavement management. Doing a software evaluation to look at, when we ended up narrowing down to 3 software packages based on some feedback that we were getting. Then implementing that software under phase 2, then doing training and documentation of that entire process, which just wrapped up here in February, went live February, or soft go live essentially, waiting for that condition data to come in. Some future tasks that we do have on our plate are, we're going to continue to provide that asset and engineering support for the county as they transition to adopting this completely into their business process. And so that'll happen over a period of time. They're also in the process of procuring the bridge inspector module as well. Something that is on the, I know that again, every county that around where Polk County is has come to see them and find out what they're trying to accomplish there. And so that's been a real eye-opener as well for that. And that is scheduled to start actually, I think even possibly May, as soon as May. So a business review we went through a very comprehensive process. We brought in people into a room and we started to talk to them, interview them, and try to get all the information we could out of them as how do they do business across, what is their agency structure, what kind of pavement performance factors are they actually tracking currently, and what would they like to track into the future if they had the data to support it. Of course, with that whole process, you're going to be looking for gaps in that. You're not looking to shut the door completely on it. You're just saying, go get it and go get the data if you're trying to make those decisions. We looked through their construction practices. One of the key features I think the Kercher Group brings to any of these kinds of implementations is deep background in construction practices, pavement preservation, those sorts of things, and trying to make sure that you're utilizing best practices as you do that. We looked through their budgetary processes, and this was a pretty deep dive into, how does the financials work within the county, and what can we expect if we were running some optimization scenarios against your budgeting? What could we expect to need to configure for that? And then we also looked at their asset management processes, which really gets down into what Harrold really contributed to this, which is all the data flow that's happening around the system. There were a couple important concerns that came out of the business review that I thought were worth noting as well. Polk County, being centrally located in Florida between the city of Orlando and Tampa, has seen an immense growth in freight traffic in recent years, and is projected over the next 10 years to, I believe, double. And so their pavements are taking a major beating right now. A lot of them were not designed for the kind of loads they're seeing currently. And so we see that as a major challenge moving forward, not only for how do we track conditions and those sorts of things, but also how do you keep maintaining that funding? How do you justify that funding? And that was really the big push to having a software like this, being able to run those kinds of scenarios and convince executive level management that you do need to take this seriously, that the money is very important. A couple other things that I noted as well is, in general, their pavements are very thin, much thinner than I would have imagined, but that's the state of Florida. They just don't get the kind of cycles, I think, that you see in other parts of the country that really lead to needing those heavier pavements. Also, as much as I'm not trying to throw anybody necessarily under the bus, but the land development group has very lax rules in construction of pavements, and so right out of the gate, a lot of the new roads that get built in the county are coming in under-designed or coming in very difficult to maintain, I would say, into the future. And so again, another challenge is, now we're talking about bigger policy than just what treatments are you putting on the pavements. This is really convincing essentially politicians that, which is a difficult thing to do, is that there's money being made here, but we have to make sure that we do the right thing at the end of the day. And so those were some just key highlights that I thought were worth mentioning as we started to work through the process. So again, we did also provide guidance on pavement data collection. We developed a condition survey manual for them. They do a windshield survey. We did transition them from the PACER process, a 1 to 9 scale, very subjective process, to something a little bit more objective, where you're getting severities and extents of each distress. I know a lot of you in this room are familiar with that process. But also having the ability to directly correlate that information to distress indices that they're tracking, all the way up through to a general health index of PCI. Again, they didn't have any of this in the past. They just had a 1 through 9 scale. So there's not a lot of granularity there and not a lot of connection between what you're seeing in the field and that score you're seeing at the end of the day. And that's a really important thing to get buy-in at all levels within the agency. Beyond the pavement data collection process itself, we also developed a data quality management guideline plan for them, and that's the process that Harrold had identified, the QA process that he goes out and does. Maybe not as robust as maybe some of the states in here are doing for the federal requirements, but certainly along those same lines. We did leave room in there if they were to say transition someday from manual to automated methods. The idea would be is that you create a process that can be somewhat transitioned. Having gone through that a few times with other state DOTs, that can be a whole process unto itself. As I said, we did a software evaluation of 3 software vendors. AgileAssets was one of them. The Infor Public Sector, which they currently have in-house now for other assets, was also reviewed as well. In fact, when we went into the initial meetings, their intention was to build out the engineering components of Infor Public Sector. And once we started to talk through the things they wanted to be able to do, it became pretty clear pretty quick that it wasn't quite robust enough. Their analytics weren't quite robust enough to get the kind of results that we would expect. And that's really where softwares like AgileAssets really came to the table. So we developed criteria that they would use to score each of these vendors. A few things that we just identified was a great big list of all things they would like to see a software do. Everything from the data flow process, how is that managed, what are the analysis capabilities, things like I must be able to split up my budget a certain way and track condition scores and all that sort of stuff, deterioration models, all of that. We created this great big list of all these requirements. And then we gave essentially a quick little thing of, very important, neutral, or not important, essentially, just figure out how all that stuff sort of falls out. And then we let the agency score those within ranges 0 to 10 for whether or not the software met that capability with built-in functionality. And that to include things like you might have to configure something. You might have to configure a window or configure a decision tree. Or that software meets it with customization, which requires much more in-depth change to the software, or it doesn't meet the criteria at all. And then through that process, then we had the vendors, each vendor do a presentation. They called in and gave a remote presentation for each system. The county scored those, so gave a score. There was a panel of 3. Harrold was one of them, their pavement management engineer, and they also have another IT maintenance management person who was also there doing the scoring. And then ultimately there was a software selection report that was put out based on all that scoring, tallying that up and coming up with the system that sort of rose to the surface. Obviously, we wouldn't be standing here if AgileAssets didn't come to the surface, which is kind of obvious. Beyond that, once the software was selected, it needed to be implemented. And so now we're really diving into things like how do you want to pass data around? How do you currently pass data around? And let's not disrupt that too much. Going back to the slide that Harrold brought up there with the sort of GIS-centric flow of data, really facilitated, it really made our lives really easy when it came to implementation. In past implementations, when you're working with local government agencies, a lot of times you have things that reside in an Access database, they reside in an Excel spreadsheet, or maybe there's an existing payment management system that they're using, and you're just pulling data in and populating tables into the software or into a software. What we found was we were actually able to turn off editability in a lot of the tables because all of the data flow comes from one single source, the GIS. And that actually was so effective and, that we have already told a lot of our other agencies, especially local government agencies, do it that way. If you already have a GIS department, which generally for local governments is the asset management department as well, they kind of serve 2 purposes. Perhaps that's the way you want to move forward with all of this as well. Let everything just pass back and forth from that one single source. The only things that are manually edited in there are construction history and master work plans. So if they kind of keep up to date on those sorts of things. Actually, even master work plans, I think, now can be passed back and forth. So there's a lot of things that we're doing to try to take advantage of the fact that there is this centralized hub of data. The other component of that is, of course, there's other systems out there being used around the agency. And instead of having to have us, with this software, try to talk to them directly, we all talk to the same, we sort of all play to the same sheet of music. So we went through the process of developing out all the, they gave us the inventory, condition data processes, construction history, work plan data processes. We went through a process of taking, transitioning them from a worse first sort of mill and fill concept of managing the network to doing pavement preservation. They actually started, I think the first year we started, you also started with a really progressive process of bringing in a lot of different preservation treatments. And so they're really expanding what they do and where they do it. The idea, the issue there was that there wasn't anyone in the agency that really knew, well, when do I apply this treatment versus applying that treatment? And what are the kind of criteria that I should be looking for? And that was really where we came in. We also came in sort of just this kind of a quick snapshot of, they have different indices that they track, and we had to come up with all the rules for, what are the add-back rules or the improvement rules that happen for each treatment, what changes when a treatment is selected, those sorts of things that if anyone is delve into the depths of pavement analysts, it knows is necessary when you're setting up treatments. Decision trees ultimately became a pretty significant process as well. We had, I think at the end of the day, we ended up with something like five trees, but they all sort of looked like that. So there's a lot of rules that they put into place that, again, they didn't even consciously ever write down. They just said, well, we would probably do this treatment on that road, and we'd do this treatment on that road. Well, as you started to pull that information out of them, you realized that there were some very clear guidance and rules you could put in place and have the software recommend those treatments to you. And the whole idea of that, for anyone who's used the software, is I've always sort of been a practitioner in the sense that the data side of things is great. That's a necessary part of pavement management. But I've really been most interested in applying treatments and right treatment, right place, right time, that concept. So when I started working with them, I realized that this is a great opportunity to really show what they're doing, put those decision trees in place, and so that they were getting a good work plan right out of the gate. That was really something that I push as well for agencies that are using this software is when you run scenarios, it's great to get your metrics reported, but it's also really important that your work plan be as useful as possible. I won't say it's a 100% solution, but if it's a 75 or 80% solution, that's a pretty darn good thing there. And that really cuts down the amount of leg time required to go out and do your project assessments. We also did a performance modeling process. Now, the county didn't have any historical data for us to really go and model, so we were really doing an expert opinion, kind of a round table. As the years go by and they start to roll out this new method where it's a little more robust pavement condition data process, we're hoping to get some data to model and to really try to inform this. But for right now, we had the right people in the room. They've known their pavements for years. They know how they deteriorate. I was shocked. I can't believe pavement's that thin. Can last that long, but but it's certainly possible. And then beyond that, we really needed to help them sort of fulfill this process of being able to run their optimization analyses, report their performance metrics, and then also to start talking about the GIS mapping within the software. They do a lot of GIS mapping in Esri, but they also have a lot of folks in the agency that are not sort of necessarily Esri savvy, but they're using this software. The idea would be give them a mapping tool that they can use to put together work plans and those sorts of things. I want to quickly go through a couple of scenarios that we ran preliminarily to show the benefit of using the software. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is this is really great sort of dovetail into what Stuart showed this morning about return on investment and why you need to sort of might have to prove to someone why you should do it this way, you do this process. Once you've run scenarios like this and you're justifying these processes, it becomes pretty apparent pretty fast how much money you can save. So I'm just going to quickly go through these couple things here. One of these is a comparing optimization process, that this new process they're going to go through, to the old worst first ranking process they used to use. And they would typically get $12 million. So 2,500 miles plus $12 million for pavement rehab work. So that's not a lot of money. By the time we were running this scenario, they only had 30% of the network condition data complete. And so what I did was let's just take 30% of the budget and we'll just run it against the data that you currently have. That became $3.6 million a year. I ran a 10-year scenario. I ran the optimization analysis, and I also in the software ran a worst first analysis so I could show the difference, the benefit of changing the way you do business. And so just a quick thing here, hard to see the lines necessarily, but red is the optimization result and green is the worst first result, but the striking thing here is a 5-point difference by year 10 in your optimization. Now it's obvious they're underfunded, right? We're still going downwards. And 5 points may not sound like a lot unless you all have ever ran these scenarios. You know how much money 5 points has hidden in there. It's hard to come up 5 points. So that was a significant result that we saw. We also did another metric comparing backlog of costs. And so this is for all the unmet needs, the money that was already spent allocated to the network, everything else that was left to treat. This is the sum of that money. And so in 2027, the optimized solution had a backlog of $70.6 million. Multiply that by 3.33, for the full network if you extrapolate that out, and obviously you're up at 200 and some million dollars. The worst first was $75 million. So just by changing what they're doing, they saved $4.4 million in this scenario. That's essentially a little over a year's worth of budget in a 10-year period. We also tracked another metric, which is something that's pretty common for local governments, probably maybe also for some of the state DOTs as well. I know a few that have tracked this. Is the idea of how much mileage did we actually treat over that period of time. So centerline mileage treated over a 10-year period. They rated 700 miles of the 2,500-mile network. If they ran the optimized process, they were able to treat 44% of the network with that amount of funding. The worst first were able to treat 29% of the network. And so now you're talking about your constituents, you're talking about the public, the general public. Now it's level of service conversation. And you can see that now we're just servicing more of the public with this process. Another scenario that we ran and we thought was very useful was, okay, well, we already ran the $12 million scenario, 3.6 million, the extrapolated value. We also ran other varying budget scenarios, which is a common practice. Ran 2, 5, and 8. I picked 8 because 30% of the network, 8 equates to roughly about maintain current condition funding, so roughly $27 million, I think it is, a year. So they're currently funded at $12 million a year, and they actually need about $27 million a year to maintain their current condition. So we compared those results. And so you can see 3.6 is their current funding, the green line, and where they fall related to the 8 million scenario. It's kind of self-explanatory. This one was one that I thought was really striking. If you have used the $3.6 million scenario, obviously their backlogs are just sort of growing through time. They're not able to get on top of their backlog. If they spend appropriately, they get the $8 million that they need to maintain current condition, their backlogs will decrease over time. And that difference ultimately comes down to, I did a little bit of sort of back of the napkin math here. Ultimately, that change, just by this might sound strange, spend more money to save more money, actually equated to something along about $43 million in year 10. The difference between spending $12 million a year or $27 million a year. And so that's a significant amount of money they can save by just appropriately funding it and appropriately managing it. And so just to wrap up here, what's next for Polk County? Well, like I said, we are going to be implementing the bridge inspector here in 2018, probably the next month, or so. And we are going to continue to provide sort of the ongoing asset management engineering support. Again, once the final condition data comes in and we're running the scenarios, you're really going to get a sense of whether or not this thing is working for you. And I think anyone else in this room knows what I'm talking about there. The county is considering options for bridge and maintenance management out of AgileAssets, and that kind of goes back to the comment that Harrold made about, the permitting group they're going into the Excella program. They're getting pushed to go maybe take roads and drainage into that as well. But I think after having seen what we were capable of doing with this system, there's now a lot of renewed interest in potentially continuing on using the AgileAssets suite. County executive buy-in was a huge part of this. One of the key points that I got out of one of our final wrap-up meetings for the project was we sat down with some of the executives there, and they're not concerned at all about the nuts and bolts of this. They want to know, if I give you this much money, what's going to happen to the roads, and that's it. But one of the things that really piqued his interest was when I said, well, you've had a lot of counties come and knock on your door and ask you about what you're doing now that you're doing this. And there's 67 counties in Florida, and just the ones that are immediately around them, just about every one of them has been to see what Polk County has done. And when I told the county executive that group, they were like, "Ooh, we want to be number one. We want to," so they were really excited to get out and tout what they were capable of doing. And so that really was important. It's just like finding the right thing to convince them, And like I said, Polk County is leading, kind of getting back to the final crux of this presentation. They are leading the other Florida counties in asset management. It's amazing with such large networks that they're not taking it as seriously with some little more robust analysis capabilities. And so with that, I'd like to thank you, and any questions?
Any questions?
I made a big stink about it, didn't I?
In some cases, it's an inch.
Seriously?
Yes.
Stone's thickness in
Yes,
some cases.
it's as thin as they could possibly put it, the new subdivisions. I just drove down one the other day, and there's grass coming through it. It's brand new. They have 3 houses built.
What kind of mixed design?
You're using super paved mixes.
Super
and,
paved
yeah,
typically.
yeah.
I really don't know what's in the
9.5
land development
millimeter,
code. But that's where they count it. They get the structural number they need, and they're good to go. But
Yeah,
it doesn't bid well for us when there's concrete curbs and you have to mill it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can't maintain that.
Yeah, the challenge that I saw for them is, some of these roads, even though there's, quarter inch is the extreme case, but an inch and a quarter is
Yeah.
not uncommon.
Yes.
On top of what shell rock, I think is the base material a lot of the times.
Typically lime rock.
Yeah,
or
lime
coquina.
rock. Yeah, and so it's what struck me was that you don't really have a lot of options to maintain that pavement. If you can't mill it, what are you going to, a lot of times what they're doing is they're going to have to come back in, 15, 20 years and reclaim it and try to rebuild a structure. And that's unfortunate because it's, with the case I was making was it's bought and paid for. When the land developer comes in, you should sort of get it right the first time. So
That's for sure.
yes, sir.
What version of the software do you guys have?
You're on 7.2 now, I
7.2,
believe.
yeah.
Yeah, they came out of the gate. They're on the SaaS they're just hosted. They're not in-house. So essentially, once you kind of get them on the cycle, it's kind of what they were talking about earlier today. Michael and the group was talking about earlier today. It's kind of staying up to date on the upgrades and so on without having to really think about it too much.
Yes.
Couple questions. How many different types of distresses are you collecting
10.
for asphalt or asphalt and concrete? Do you do
Asphalt,
concrete?
we don't do concrete.
Okay. And
Well,
then
we
you're-
have a few concrete roads, but we don't even really inspect them. We just,
And then you're,
Stay.
let me see if I get this correct. You're taking your GIS and exporting the table out
correct.
to an Excel and then importing it into AgileAssets?
We're just exporting out into ArcPad. So it's
Into-
basically just
No,
exporting
that's
out the
where you do your
database.
collection, right?
Right.
Yeah, you're like checking it out, and then they collect and then check it back
And then
in.
we just import the shapefile directly into Agile.
Yeah, you can use a shapefile format and just import that directly.
Okay.
And that brings it both the geometry and the
And brings
and the data.
everything in, and then it's all there to export back out. So that's where we
Yeah.
can do our plans and everything and export them out as shapefiles
So
too.
you got
We-
one button, update target tables?
It's we created a bunch of system jobs that would essentially we try to make it as simple as possible.
Yep.
And there's essentially one system job that you run. It's just, and once you've sort of identified where the target table, that target shapefile is, it's just a matter of running that one thing, and it does everything. It does the import. We run a procedure to make sure all the data's in place and all that kind of. Then there's an update target table process to get all the data updated. Yeah. And the nice thing about it is most of it's read-only. Like I said, they don't necessarily have to interact with the data in pavement management if they don't want. It's up to them. All the data that's there is really just for reporting, filtering, finding, all that kind of stuff. If you need edits, all that is managed through his department.
Want to go one direction. I don't
That's
want
right.
bidirectional, if I can help it.
Any other questions? Well, with that, I think we'll wrap it up.
Okay.
Thank you guys
All
very
right.
much
Thank you.
for-
Thank you.